Amid the skyscrapers of Manhattan, where the glint of windows mirrors the power of a city constantly racing against time, lived someone few ever noticed, Maria Thompson, a 56-year-old Latina immigrant, widow, and mother of 2 grown children. She worked as a cleaning lady at the prestigious law firm Harrington and Wells, a corporate legal empire perched on Fifth Avenue. Every day, before the sun even peeked over the skyline, Maria crossed the Brooklyn Bridge on her way to work. Hair neatly tied in a tight bun, uniform pressed to perfection, and steps as quiet as a whisper, she entered the building like a necessary ghost. Cleaning conference rooms where million-dollar decisions were made and sweeping hallways where Wall Street's most powerful names passed by. She listened, she observed, and without meaning to, she became a silent witness to something that should have never happened. One simple phrase from her lips would change the course of a company, and prove that true courage often comes from the one person no one ever sees. In the city that never sleeps, where buildings scrape the sky and the streets sparkle with the shine of luxury store windows, lives Maria Thompson. She's not on billboards. She doesn't have a LinkedIn profile. No one mentions her in meetings. But every morning, long before dawn, she leaves her small apartment in the Bronx with a worn-out backpack slung over her shoulder and her neatly folded uniform tucked inside. On the packed 5:12 a.m. train, she holds tightly to the cold metal rail, surrounded by other invisible workers. Immigrants, elderly people, single mothers, all of them carrying the same quiet mission, to keep New York City running. When Maria arrives on Fifth Avenue, the contrast hits like a slap. From the modest comfort of her home, she steps into a world of marble floors, glass walls, and carefully curated silence. The headquarters of Harrington and Wells, one of the most powerful corporate law firms in the country. Everything sparkles here. The hallways are scented, the coffee is imported, and the words are as cold as the contracts they seal. Maria clocks in at exactly 6 a.m. She knows every corner of that place. She knows which restrooms clog the most, which conference room needs extra attention, and who always leaves their Starbucks cup on the desk. The lawyers barely acknowledge her. They call her the cleaning lady when they remember she exists. But Maria watches. She always watches. With the sharp eyes of someone who's lived through hard times, she can spot a fake smile in seconds. And though no one notices, she feels the air. Feels when something is off, when tension fills a room, when lies are floating just beneath the surface. The firm is run by Richard Sullivan, a cold, perfectionist man highly respected in the legal world. The kind of person who measures worth by efficiency. He's never once noticed Maria. To him, people like her are just part of the background. Scenery maintenance. And even though that stung at first, Maria learned to let it go. She wasn't looking for recognition. She was looking for order, justice, security. And she pursued it in her own way, broom in hand, eyes wide open. What she didn't know was that something far bigger was about to cross her path. Something that would test everything she believed in. It was a regular Wednesday when everything started to change. The building was still empty as Maria made her way up to clean the executive floors. On the 34th floor, reserved for the firm's senior partners, something felt off. A file left open on a glass desk. A half-finished glass of whiskey. And whispers echoing from a room that should have been locked. Every instinct told her to walk away, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled her closer. Holding her rag, she crept near the door. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she heard everything. And in that silent night, Maria went from invisible observer to the key piece in a story that would shake the foundations of one of America's largest law firms. The next day unfolded with its usual rhythm. New York pulsed with energy, taxis blaring down avenues, coffee shops buzzing with impromptu meetings. But for Maria, everything felt different. Her mind kept replaying the phrases she had heard the night before, like a broken record. She cleaned desks, but her focus was somewhere else entirely. Back in that dim room behind the glass door. If he signs, the money hits before the quarter ends. He doesn't need to know the details. Just hide it in the clauses. Cold, calculated words, spoken with the arrogance of men convinced they'd never be caught. And they came from the senior partners of Harrington and Wells, men admired across the legal world, with Ivy League degrees hanging proudly on their office walls. What she heard wasn't just unethical, it was a crime. Maria didn't understand every technical term, but she knew a scheme when she saw one. The contract the partners were pushing for Richard Sullivan to sign was doctored, carefully rewritten to reroute the firm's investments into shell companies. Names that sounded prestigious, promising, but in truth were nothing but fronts for money laundering and theft. It would drain millions. And worse, it would put countless pensions and retirement funds at risk. The savings of people like her. And Richard, though distant and cold, wasn't corrupt. He had no idea, which made the plan even more malicious. All morning, Maria battled a storm inside. Should she speak up? And if so, to whom? Who would believe a Latina janitor with no degree, no evidence, no power? She could be laughed at, fired, sued. But deep inside her, something stronger than fear burned. The same fire that made her report harassment as a teenager working in a restaurant, even though she lost her job for it. The same strength that helped her raise 2 children with integrity despite poverty. It was that quiet kind of courage born not from certainty but from conviction. Around 3 p.m., activity spiked on the 34th floor. The main conference room lights blazed. Lawyers darted in and out with folders, the air thick with cologne and nerves. Then she saw him, Richard Sullivan, striding in with his usual focus, his signature silver pen in hand, the pen he used to seal the firm's biggest decisions. Maria knew this was it. Once he signed, there'd be no turning back. She looked around, thought of her children, thought of everything, took a deep breath, and made a choice. She waited for the right moment, quietly entered the room with her cleaning cart, just as she always did. No one noticed. They were all focused on the contract. As Richard approached the table, ready to sign, she moved. Her heart raced, eyes fixed on the paper, soul wide awake. She stepped toward him, and then, with a trembling but steady voice, she whispered, "Sir, please don't sign this." It was like detonating a silent bomb in the room. All eyes turned to her. One partner scoffed. Another laughed dismissively. But Richard froze, didn't move. Then slowly he looked at her, for the first time. Not as the cleaning lady. But in that moment, Sullivan didn't see her as a janitor. He saw her as someone who knew something. The contract hovered between silence and decision. And in that split second, everything began to unravel. Because in that whisper, Maria didn't just save a company. She exposed a system. And she proved that even in a city built of steel and glass, the truth still has a voice. Even if it comes from someone who scrubs the floors. The air in the conference room grew heavy like lead. For a second, time stood still. Richard Sullivan, his pen still hovering above the paper, stared directly at Maria, as if trying to decipher what lay behind her words. Around him, the senior partners exchanged glances, some shocked, others visibly annoyed. A cleaning lady had interrupted a confidential meeting, and the CEO, at the most crucial moment. "What did you just say?" Sullivan asked, his voice low but sharp. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of the moment, and repeated, "There's something wrong with that contract, sir. I heard things last night. It's not what it looks like." The room, filled with inflated egos and tailored suits, fell into an uneasy silence. One attorney whispered to another, She's hallucinating. Another raised his voice. This is completely inappropriate. She's way out of line. But with a single motion of his hand, Sullivan ordered everyone to be quiet. He stepped closer to Maria, eyes locked on hers, trying to read her soul. And what he saw wasn't arrogance or a plea for attention. It was fear. Genuine fear that something terrible would happen if he signed that paper. Do you have any proof? He asked. Maria shook her head. No, sir. Just what I heard. But please, read it again. Slowly. It was a moment no one could have expected. A CEO known for mastering billion-dollar contracts, pausing to hear a woman who had been quietly cleaning the halls since before the executives arrived. But he read it, carefully, and as he scanned the document again, a few technical words caught his eye. Innocent on their own, but when pieced together, they hinted at hidden transfers, irreversible permissions, and clauses that shielded certain individuals from scrutiny. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't Maria overreacting. This was real. Sullivan halted the signing immediately. The meeting was dissolved. The senior partners, visibly uneasy, were dismissed, but not before a stern warning. Not a word of this leaves this room until further notice. Once the room cleared, he asked Maria to stay. Why did you do this? He asked. Because it was the right thing to do, she said without hesitation. I don't understand corporate law, but I understand people. And what I heard wasn't right. I just couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. He fell silent, as if her words hit deeper than any corporate audit ever had. Thank you for not staying silent, he said quietly, then turned to his internal team. He ordered a full, confidential investigation into the contract. That night, Maria went home unaware of the magnitude of what she had set in motion. To her, she was just a woman trying to do the right thing. But at the top of Harrington and Wells, a towering house of cards, foundations were beginning to crack. And the first tremor had come from someone no one ever paid attention to. In the days that followed, Harrington and Wells still looked powerful from the outside. But inside, a silent storm was brewing. Richard Sullivan, without alerting the wider staff, hired an outside forensic auditing firm, specialists in uncovering financial fraud and tracking hidden transactions. Line by line, every document was examined. Emails were recovered. Accounts were cross-referenced. And in less than a week, the truth exploded. The contract Sullivan nearly signed masked a scheme to embezzle over $80 million. A carefully orchestrated plan led by 3 senior partners, using shell companies and offshore accounts to funnel corporate funds into their own pockets. The most devastating detail? The money wasn't coming from just anywhere. Part of it was pulled from investment funds managing the retirement savings of everyday workers. People like Maria, nurses, bus drivers, teachers, hardworking people who would have lost everything without ever knowing why. And it all would have been sealed with one signature. When the truth hit, Sullivan called an emergency board meeting. With full reports in hand and undeniable proof, he didn't hesitate. The 3 implicated partners were immediately suspended. One denied the allegations. Another demanded legal counsel. But the data was irrefutable, and the verdict was clear. The case would be handed over to the FBI. The media leak was inevitable. Within 48 hours, major news outlets were broadcasting the story across the country. Janitor uncovers multi-million-dollar fraud in corporate law firm. Maria Thompson, the woman who stopped a national scandal. She wasn't a lawyer, but she saved millions. The story spread like wildfire. National shows like CNN Tonight, The View, and Good Morning America scrambled to get interviews. Reporters camped outside Maria's small home in the Bronx. But she refused every offer. I didn't do it for attention, she said. I did it because I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing I let that happen. Richard Sullivan, on the other hand, chose to speak out. In a surprise press conference at the firm's headquarters, he did something no one expected. He publicly acknowledged the attempted fraud, admitted how close he came to signing, and, visibly moved, thanked Maria. If it weren't for her, I would have signed that contract without a second thought. She saw what none of us did. Or rather, she had the courage to speak when everyone else stayed silent. His words went viral. The entire nation came to know Maria's face. But what they didn't see was how deeply it affected her. She still took the same train, carried the same backpack, walked into the same building. But now the glances were different. Employees greeted her with respect. Executives who had once ignored her now apologized for years of indifference. Even Richard waited at the front entrance each morning. "Good morning, Miss Thompson," he'd say. And she, with that quiet, steady smile, would reply, "Good morning, sir." But the spotlight also brought danger. The lawyers under investigation tried to retaliate. They accused her of violating their privacy, claimed she had no right to overhear confidential conversations.